Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm going to take you today through a study of Proverbs. No, it's not going to be the entire book of Proverbs. We don't have that much time today. Maybe one day. But what I want to take you through is the overview, an overview of the book of Proverbs, and to share with you something that God showed me last year when I was doing a journey through the Bible. And as I was looking at this book, it struck me as I was studying and reading and looking at all the commentaries that this is a really misunderstood book. And God showed something to me and revealed something to me that just really released me from something that had held me bound for a very long time. And I want to share that with you today. So the final chapter in the book of Proverbs, I'm gonna go straight there. The final chapter in the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 31, is often one used to be held up as a mirror to women. And women look at it and they look at this perfect woman that is described, and it is a perfect woman who is described in this chapter, and they read it and I don't know, maybe you are like me, you felt inadequate, useless, a failure at being a wife, a mother, a homemaker, because this was held up as an ideal, something that I should attempt to live up to. What God showed me last year was that was a misrepresentation of His word, and particularly this chapter, which has a much more powerful and amazing meaning than what we see in that very shallow interpretation that has been used to keep women bound for so long. So I want to share that with you, but I'm going to share that with you in the broader understanding of what the book of Proverbs is all about, because I want you to understand how it actually fits into the entire book. So let's go and have a look at what we can learn from the book of Proverbs. Now, the book of Proverbs, it was written by Solomon, about 80% of it, and then someone called Agur and a guy called King Lemuel. And then there were a whole bunch of other unknowns from about chapter 22 to 24. We're not really sure who they were, and that information is not given within the book or anywhere else in the Bible. What we know is that it was written by a group of wise men or sages who were leaders or educated people in the society in which they lived. Now, that may have been in Israel, but also in the surrounding nations. And Solomon was the most famous of those ones. He wrote probably about 3,000 proverbs altogether, about 800 of which are captured in the book of Proverbs. Wise men were people who would give counsel to the kings. They were people who lived within the community, who were upheld by the community, and they would give counsel to kings, but also to all the people within that community, including some of the poor. If you needed wise counsel, you would go and see a wise man. Many of the prophets in the Old Testament were in fact wise men, and people would go to visit them and ask them for counsel, and they would impart their wisdom to them. So we know that it was written to all people. It was written to the simple, it was written to the young. We know from the text that it was written as though from a father to a son. It was also written to the wise, and it was written to impart wisdom. So when we read the book of Proverbs, that's what we need to keep in mind, that broader context, this notion and this understanding that it was written to help the reader to gain wisdom. Now, that's an important theme for this book, and something that I really want you to hold on to. The book of Proverbs forms part of what we call the wisdom literature in the Bible. That includes things like the Psalms and obviously the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. All of those books together make up what is known as the wisdom literature. Now, within those books and within the book of Proverbs, there are many poetical devices that are being used. Again, this is a key bit of information for understanding the whole of the book. And so we see throughout the book, we will see things like sayings and couplets, like two sentences together, that form a contrast perhaps. We'll see similes using the words like, and we'll see metaphors using the words as. And then we see something called personification. In fact, a lot of the book is about personification. Now, personification is where we take something that isn't a person and we give it a person value or a person characteristic, a personal characteristic. And in the book of Proverbs, that personification is of wisdom. Wisdom, or chokhmah, means firmness or solidity. It's having an opinion based upon sound reasons. It allows you to be equipped for a very successful life. And it's something that lives actually inside of you. And the book of Proverbs kind of teases this out and starts to make you aware of what that might look like. What it does tell us is that the fear of the Lord is the foundation of wisdom, and that the true test of that wisdom, as we learn throughout the book of Proverbs, is in what you do with it. Other than that, it's just mere knowledge, really. Wisdom has many different facets in the book of Proverbs, such as discipline, as we'll read. We read about the sluggard who is, foolish. The wise person works and has discipline and achieves things by being disciplined. It is about insight. It is about knowledge. It's about understanding. It's about prudence and discernment, having discretion, and getting guidance. Getting guidance from wise people and wise counsel is what we get told in Proverbs over and over again. So these are the sort of things that we find as a background to understanding how wisdom is portrayed in Proverbs. But there is one key way. I mentioned that personification, and it's a really important one. Wisdom throughout Proverbs is formed in 3 different sections, and she is presented as a woman, and it actually works all the way through Proverbs. This woman we meet is all the way through. In the first 8 chapters, we meet her as a young woman. Then in the next section, that's chapters 9 to 30, we meet her as someone who is maturing, who is gaining wisdom, who is learning how to use wisdom in a mature way. And then in the final section, that final chapter, we meet her again as a woman, wisdom in all of her fullness. Let's have a look at each of those sections individually. In chapter 1 to 8, as I said, she is a young single woman calling out, "Follow me, follow me." I want to read some of that for you in chapter 1, because I think it's really important that we kind of get a sense of this from the book. And of course, I'm reading from my She Reads Truth Bible, as always, and I'm going to open it straight to chapter 1, and even the heading, it tells us wisdom's plea. Wisdom calls out, this is from verse 20. So if we go Proverbs 1, we read the purpose of Proverbs, and then avoiding the path of the violent, and then in verse 20, wisdom's plea. Wisdom calls out in the street. She makes her voice heard in the public squares. She cries out above the commotion. She speaks at the entrance of the city gates. How long, inexperienced ones, will you love ignorance? How long will you mockers enjoy mocking, and you fools hate knowledge? If you respond to my warning, then I will pour out my spirit on you and teach you my words. Such a beautiful, beautiful verse there. And so she's inviting people to come and to follow her and to respond to her and to help learn more about her. And that is the invitation we see there in those verses, starting in verse 20 and all the way through to 33 of that chapter. In chapter 4, verse 8 to 9, we see more of her. And we read, it's all the way through. Chapter 3, wisdom will bring happiness. We learn about it there. Happy is the man who finds wisdom and who acquires understanding, for she, remember that personification I talked about, for she is more profitable than silver. All the way through. And then in verses 8 to 9, we meet her again. It refers to this young woman called Wisdom, and Solomon advises his son to cherish her. Wisdom, he says in verse 7, is supreme, so get wisdom, and whatever else you get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. If you embrace her, she will honor you. She will place a garland of favor on your head. She will give you a crown of beauty. And that is what we see there in those verses. A young woman who is called wisdom. Wisdom personified as a young woman. Solomon advises his son to grab her, to cherish her, to honor her, to embrace her for what she will bring to him. And then chapter 8, that beautiful chapter right at the end of this very first section, is actually written from wisdom's point of view. And we see here that it presents the divine wisdom, and it is divine wisdom here that is personified. Wisdom's appeal starts the chapter. Doesn't wisdom call out? Doesn't understanding make her voice heard? At the heights of overlooking the road, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. Beside the gates leading into the city, in the main entrance, she cries out, "People, I call out to you. My cry is to the children of Adam. Learn to be shrewd, you who are inexperienced. Develop common sense, you who are foolish." And all the way through, there is this appeal from wisdom. This young woman who is advising people to follow her with a godly wisdom. The wisdom that is personified here is divine wisdom. To fear the Lord is to hate evil, it says in verse 13. And so on. So all the way through, we have these verses as wisdom, this young woman pleading for people to follow her. So that is up to chapter 8, a young woman. We turn the page and we come to chapter 9. And in chapter 9, we meet her as a maturing woman. And this is the opening of the second section. And it's actually a section in which she starts to build her house. Verse 1 of chapter 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has carried out her 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat. She has mixed her wine. She has also set her table. We meet her now as a woman who has built her house and who is now maturing. She's doing things within her house, dealing with her female servants, and inviting whoever is inexperienced to enter in here. Come and eat of my bread, she says, and drink the wine that I have mixed. She is a woman of hospitality. Remember that, because we'll come back to that in chapter 31, of course. So she brings it through. Instruct the wise, and he will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and he will learn more. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So it really talks about her as a woman, and she invites all to come to her. Now, the second half of that chapter is also important because it actually introduces us to a second woman, another personification, and her name is Folly. Folly is a rowdy woman. She is gullible and knows nothing. She sits by the doorway of her house, on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by. See the repetition here, another kind of poetic device from the beginning of the chapter. Calling out to those who pass by, who go straight ahead on their paths. Whoever is inexperienced, enter here. To the one who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten secretly is tasty. And so we meet Folly, the second woman in the book. of Proverbs. And that's important because in these next chapters, from chapter 10 right through to chapter 30, we actually see how wisdom is defined in detail and how folly is defined in detail. Now, we might call them, in a sense, if wisdom is the overarching theme, if wisdom is the personification of wisdom is the overarching theme, then the two sub-themes which we come across here and we see here in this Shuri's Truth Bible, the Shuri's Truth Bible at the beginning of each of their chapters always has a guide to the themes that you can find. And two of the key themes are the themes of God and man. Within that book, within the overarching book of wisdom. And so what we see in these sub-themes is of God and man is the woman of wisdom and the woman of folly. And we get this contrast all the way through these next 20 chapters or so of the way that wisdom is worked out within that, and the way folly is worked out within that. And so I've given some verses there on the screen for you to have a look at and to read through. And then finally we get to the final chapter of Proverbs 31. Now the first 9 verses of that chapter are an introduction, but those verses there, the 21 verses that you see there, Proverbs 31 verse 10 to 31, and I want to give a little bit of background about this, is that they are an acrostic. Each verse starts with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So you go all the way, 22 verses, because of course verse 10 as well, all the way through we read those verses and they each start with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, it was written by someone called Lemuel. Now, we don't know who Lemuel is, as I said at the beginning. It could be any person, obviously a wise person. And in the past, if you read some of the very older commentaries, you will read that they regard particularly chapters 30 and 31 as kind of an appendix almost to the book, because they were written by this Lemuel and they don't know who he is. There is almost this thought that it doesn't belong, that it's been kind of tacked on by someone at the end. But one thing I really realized as I was reading through the book all at once last year, and what I love to do is I love to sit down and just read the book, read it all at once, read it without the breaks, without the chapters, as though it's just one story. And one of the things that struck me as I was reading it and I was looking at this theme of wisdom as a woman is that actually this is how God intended this book to be put together. Young woman, maturing woman, and this final chapter as the mature woman called wisdom. She is now an older woman. So we see that in this chapter, this mature woman, this, when they get the first 9 verses or so, we see that is an introduction, and it almost echoes the introduction to the book. A young man at that time, this one is to a king, and wisdom and instruction to a king. Perhaps the son is now the king. But in the second half, she is now fully personified in the poem called the Proverbs 31 woman, and it encapsulates her in full with all of her amazing qualities. And it is not about women at all. It's not about you or me. So I want to read to you something now that is a paraphrase of this that kind of helps to take away the she and the woman part of it. Not because I want to take that away, because I actually think that it's really beautiful and powerful, but it's to try and break this idea that this is only about you or me as a woman, but this is actually for everyone. So this was written, it's a paraphrase of Proverbs 31, and it was written by someone called Amanda Ancliffe. She was a pastor at Christian City Church in Oxford Falls in Australia. And it goes like this: wisdom is virtuous and noble. Who can find it? wisdom is precious, worth far more than rubies. If your confidence is in wisdom, then you will lack nothing of value. Wisdom will bring you good, not harm, all the days of your life. Wisdom is being discerning in business matters. Wisdom works diligently and skillfully. Wisdom plans ahead, managing the household. Wisdom looks out and gives to others. Wisdom promotes joy and peace in relationships. Wisdom brings prosperity and a bright future. Wisdom attracts favor and wins respect. Wisdom brings reward and favor. Wisdom comes when we fear the Lord. This paraphrase is so beautiful and so powerful, and it helps us to understand that this idea of wisdom is something that isn't an appendix to the book. This is not something to be held up as a mirror to me, to kind of bind me, but it is something that is for everyone. This wisdom is for all people. It's the idea of it is that it reflects, what we saw in chapter 1, what we saw in chapter 4, what we see in chapter 8, what we see in chapter 9, wisdom preparing a house. Now she is this mature woman who has lived a full and fruitful life. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for you and me? It means if you're a woman, it means that the chains that may have bound you to live up to the expectations of being a Proverbs 31 woman, I'm setting you free from that bondage. That is not what this chapter is about. And if you're a guy listening to this and you think that this chapter is about your wife and what she needs to be doing, set her free. Release her from those expectations, because that is not what this chapter is about. This chapter is a final invitation for both men and women to live in wisdom. This whole book is about an invitation to live in wisdom. It's about you deciding, do you want to follow wisdom? Do you want to follow folly? What is it that you want to do? The conclusion of the book of Proverbs makes the concept of wisdom concrete so that we can see as Christians what mature wisdom looks like in action. That is the purpose of this chapter. It's about our trustworthiness, our shrewdness, our generosity, our diligence, our care in speaking. All of these things are evidence of wisdom, and we can demonstrate that we have wisdom regardless of who we are as a Christian through these things. And that is what Proverbs 31 is about. So how do we get wisdom? Because it says there in chapter 9 verse 10, we read that the beginning, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. James picks this up. James says you can get wisdom by asking for it, and God who gives generously will give it in abundance. It says in that verse, chapter 1 of verse 5. But who is wisdom? Who can we understand as Christians, this side of the cross, wisdom to be? Oh, we know that, don't we? We know that it is Jesus Christ. In Jesus Christ is the fullness of all wisdom. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 30, and you see it there on your screen, says, it is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, our holiness, and our redemption. And in Christ, and in Colossians 1 verse 3, Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. That is the power of wisdom, the wisdom of God, the wisdom of Christ living in us who are living in Christ. It is such freedom to know that I don't have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, that I don't have to get up before the dawn, I don't have to sew clothes, I don't have to bake bread. All the things that I would fail at, the things that have been held over me in the past as as I said, as a mirror. Because of Proverbs 31, because of this misinterpretation of Proverbs 31, people not understanding the power of this chapter, that this is about wisdom for all of us, the wisdom that is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Yes, wisdom, the book of Proverbs is all about wisdom, and in it, it is personified as a woman, the three stages of her, as a young woman, as a maturing woman, as the mature woman that we meet in that final chapter. And we are encouraged through this book to seek that wisdom, moving to maturity. Even as she moved to maturity, so are we encouraged as men and women, as Christians, as those who love Jesus, to mature in wisdom through pursuing him, through digging into his word, through understanding what this book teaches us, through all its richness and all its depth. All of this book right here, just after the middle of your Bible, sort of wedged between Psalms and Ecclesiastes, this book, read it, learn it, read the themes of it, and understand what wisdom is. Read it from beginning to end, understanding that is, by understanding that and studying that, we get a depth of understanding of what wisdom is all about. And remember that Jesus Christ is the personification of that wisdom, as we read in the New Testament. And we can ask him. Let me end with that verse from James and find that very quickly here in my Bible. There it is, James chapter 1 and verse 5. And it says, right there, it says, "Now, if any of you lack wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him." And a great place to start is to read the word Proverbs and dwell in that and meditate on that and make it your own. Wisdom from start to finish, chapter 1 through to chapter 31. Thank you.